So what does sourdough bread have to do with digital remix culture, you might ask? Let's set it up. Recently, my wife and I were given a small amount of mother dough, or sourdough starter, from the best bakery in town. The small, empty container on the right is the amount that the owner gave us. We accidentally fed it a little too much, and it grew beyond the larger container we used before we turned it into our first loaf of bread. The owner of the shop created the sourdough starter more than 5 years ago. Some bakeries are still using mother dough that was started close to 200 years ago to bake their sourdough bread.
Oh, you got the mother dough!
Our first attempt was, it was okay. The crust was a little too thick and crunchy, and the bread was a little too dense, but it was good. We gave some of the starter to our friend. This is the bread that she made out of it. I didn't get to taste it, but I heard it was good. I'm also giving my brother some of the starter so that he can make his own bread. Someone's original creation from 5 years ago was openly shared with one person, who then shared it with 2 others. Even though it started from the same starter dough, each loaf of bread will look and taste different and become a unique creation. This sounds pretty familiar, right? Memes, music, art, video, and on and on and on and on. We were given permission to use somebody else's original creation so that we could turn it into something else. And then we shared it with several other people who could, in turn, share it with someone else. When we're online, we call it remix culture. Filmmaker Kirby Ferguson created a 4-part series called Everything is a Remix, which I'd highly recommend checking out, and I'll leave a link in the description below. Okay, so when you make something, a photo, a video, a drawing, you own the copyright to that work. Where you post it and what license you give it will depend on how people can interact with it. Once the local bakery owner gave us the starter dough, it's up to us what we choose to do with it. Granted, if she'd ask us specifically not to share it with anyone, we would have happily obliged because we're not jerks. Legally, however, we could still do with it as we saw fit. In the same way, there are a number of protections for people to remix things digitally. Fair use and Creative Commons specifically allow many people to push art and culture forward by using part of someone else's creation to create something new, to relay knowledge for educational purposes, or to add to a conversation. As an example, Stan Muller from Crash Course explains fair use well in this video, Copyright Exceptions in Fair Use, Crash Course Intellectual Property number 3, and I'll leave a link to the original video in the description below.
But by far the broadest, most flexible, most controversial, and most famous copyright exception is fair use. Courts have said the fair use defense allows them to, quote, avoid rigid application of the copyright statute when, on occasion, it would stifle the very creativity which that law is designed to foster. Fair use acts like a safety valve. It allows for certain socially beneficial uses that you may otherwise get in trouble for. To paraphrase an 1841 court decision, the progress of learning advances when the law allows follow-on authors to bestow their intellectual labor and judgment in reworking selections from a prior work without prejudicing the profits or prospects of that work. What? Who would say this? You know, Mark, I would love to advance the progress of learning by bestowing my intellectual labor and judgment on the reworking of this prior work, but I just worry about prejudicing the profits or the prospects of that work. Anyway, fair use is an affirmative defense, which means the defendant must show and prove that the use was fair and not an infringement. The only way to definitively find out whether something is fair use is by having a judge tell you it is. And this is a problem when taking a copyright case through trial costs anywhere from $300,000 to a couple $1 million. Some courts have called the fair use exception the most troublesome in the whole law of copyright, and they are not wrong. I mean, the term fair use isn't defined in the Copyright Act, and courts have a lot of leeway in how they decide if something is a fair use. Courts have to consider all the factual evidence at hand for each particular case, and every case is different thanks to the huge variety of copyrightable works and the many contexts in which these works can be used, like classroom lessons, blog posts, YouTube videos, or in a project where the entire contents of a university library are digitized.
So I took kind of a windy road to reach my point. Remix culture has always existed, whether it's one musician influencing another or someone sharing their mother dough. Currently, in the digital age, we need to be mindful of the content we share and how we share it. We need to understand the laws and permissions, but we also need to keep the conversation moving forward in terms of our artistic creations. I'd recommend checking out some of the resources I'm listing below to learn more. Thank you for watching.